A withered cat sits atop a dusty dinner table on an abandoned cruise ship. Its spine a ridge of protruding vertebrae beneath skin stretched taut over bone. I drag the glass shard from the railing, its jagged edge catching the weak light like a sliver of frozen rain, and press it into my palm. The ship's hull bleeds its pattern, a lattice of cracks where the glass met the metal. I stitch it into my pocket, the shard's outline tracing the map of my own decay, the cold seeping through my thin shirt. The emaciated cat lifts its head, its thin bones creaking like dry twigs snapping under pressure. It pads across the table, its claws scraping the marble surface with a sound like a piano leg dragging over stone. I feel the weight on my chest, not a dream, but the shape of grief, the absence of my daughter's laughter, the hollow where her hand should be. The freezing rain coats everything in glass, turning the ship's corridors into a cathedral of mirrored droplets. Each drop strikes the deck with a tiny flink-plink, echoing like a single note played too long on a broken piano. The air tastes of copper and old pennies, the scent of the rain's glassiness clinging to my skin. I trace the shard's outline against my wrist, feeling its sharpness embed deeper. The cat's paw lands on my wrist, its thin nails pricking through my skin. I don't pull away. I watch the glass shard's reflection in the rain-slicked window. A fractured face, a mouth open in a silent scream. The cat's eyes hold no light, only the muddy earth tone of the ship's decaying walls. I feel the sudden, sharp weight on my chest, like someone sitting there, their breath hot against my ribs. The rain's glass coating thickens, distorting the view. The cat lifts its paw, its thin, almost translucent skin revealing the bone beneath. It drops a single key onto the shard's edge. The key's cold metal sinks into the wound I've made in my wrist, the glass shard and key merging as the cat turns away, its tail flicking once like a dry leaf snapping. The ship groans, a deep, resonant frithrum that vibrates up through the deck into my bones. The cat sits motionless on the table, its head tilted, watching the key sink into my wound. The rain continues its glassy patter, each drop a tiny, perfect twinkling quid on the deck below. The key disappears, leaving only the cold press of metal against my skin. The cat's thin bones creak again, a sound like dry twigs snapping. Then, silence. The only sound is the slow, steady flink of rain on metal. The key is gone. The umbrella's fabric is a scab, dry and brittle beneath my fingers. I carve its pattern into my forearm, veins of inked raindrops that bloom in the shape of a cracked teacup. The tattered edges of the fabric fray like dead skin, each thread a splinter of memory. I open the umbrella, its ribs creaking like the spine of a long-dead thing. Inside, the fabric is dry, no rain, only a thin, crusted film of something darker. I press my thumb against it, and it crumbles, blood, not water, thick and clotted like old wine. The cat sits on the handle, its emaciated limbs quivering like the last breath of a dying moth. I blink, and the ship's walls are wet, their surfaces rippling like wet parchment. My own skin feels like paper, thin and peeling. I realize the blood rain is my own tears, each drop a jagged shard of glass that cuts through my eyelids. I taste copper, the metallic tang of something I've never known. The umbrella's handle is cold in my grip, its surface slick with the residue of my own grief. The cat's eyes are hollow, their depths the color of mud and old bones. I watch it lick the blood from my palm, its tongue a dry, rasping thing that scrapes against my skin like a knife. I feel the weight on my chest again, heavier now, like a hand pressing down, not with love, but with the weight of a secret too heavy to bear. The ship groans, a sound like a door creaking in a storm, and the cat's thin tail flicks once, a dry snap of something brittle. The rain continues its glassy patter, each drop a tiny perfect plinquai on the deck below. The umbrella's pattern is now etched into my skin, a map of something I do not yet understand. The cat's bones creak again, a sound like dry twigs snapping. Then, silence. The only sound is the slow, steady flink of rain on metal. The key is gone. The cat's weight is an anchor, its bones pressing into my palm like cold stones as I force it onto the key. It mewls, a sound that could be mistaken for a child's cry if one didn't know better. Its eyes widen, reflecting not some mystical light but the harsh reality of our situation. Muddy earth tones and all. The key is a shard of bone in my hand, its teeth biting into my flesh like tiny needles. I press harder until blood wells up around it, staining the key red. The cat hisses, arching its back, but I hold firm. Its weight feels different now, heavier, more substantial. It is as if it has grown shoulders and they are pressing down on me with all their invisible might. The ship groans around us, a symphony of creaking wood and rusted metal. The glass-coated rain outside reflects my face back at me, hollow-cheeked, disgraced surgeon eyes staring out from beneath heavy lids. I look like death itself, or perhaps that is just the weight on my chest talking. In the reflection, something moves. A faceless form in a tailored suit nods at me, its body language an eerie mimicry of mine, hands clasped behind its back, shoulders hunched under some unseen burden. It feels as if we're sharing more than just a moment. It is as though our existences are intertwined, bound by something far heavier and darker than this damnable rain. I blink, breaking the reflection. The cat is still on the key, now sinking into my ankle with an unsettling fling-plink. Each click of glass shards against metal echoes through me like a heartbeat gone awry, a violent outburst followed by silence, over and over again. It is not quite a pulse, more like the sound of a clock ticking towards doomsday. The weight on my chest grows heavier still, pressing down until I can barely breathe. But there is no pain, not physically at least. Instead, it feels like relief, as if this were what I've been waiting for all along, the crushing weight of responsibility finally manifesting in a way that makes sense to me. The cat looks up at me then, its eyes filled with an ancient wisdom beyond its years. It is not just the gatekeeper now, it is the keeper of secrets too heavy to bear alone, and I realize I've paid the price for passage through this waking nightmare. The question remains, where will these steps lead us next? The dining room smelled of old varnish and regret. A sickly sweetness clung to the air, a phantom perfume of forgotten gallus. The rain hammered against the panoramic windows, each droplet a tiny glass bead of frozen light. It wasn't just rain, it was a relentless percussion, a glassy cascade that blurred the already indistinct horizon. I moved through the room, a marionette with frayed strings, drawn by a sense of obligation I couldn't quite place. He was there, or rather the impression of him remained. A tailored coat hung suspended in the air, a void where a man should have been. The fabric, a dark, absorbent gray, seemed to drink the light, leaving a palpable absence. It wasn't a trick of the eye, not a distortion of the glass. It was a wound in the fabric of reality, a wound I felt compelled to examine. The cat watched from atop a mahogany table, its emaciated form a stark silhouette against the gloom. Its eyes, flat and obsidian, reflected nothing but the encroaching despair. It didn't blink, it didn't breathe, it seemed. Just observed AD. The weight on my chest intensified, a crushing pressure that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't painful, precisely. More like a suffocating familiarity, like returning to a place you desperately wanted to forget. I circled the coat, my fingers trailing across the smooth, unsettling texture of the material. It felt wrong, too perfect, too still. Like a taxidermied memory, the silence was absolute, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain and the faint metallic rasp of my own breath. Then, a sound. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a piano lid closing fifth vin, a finality that resonated deep within my bones. He tilted his head. Not a physical movement, but a sensation. A pressure behind my eyes, a subtle realignment of my own posture. My neck cracked, a brittle, unpleasant sound that echoed in the cavernous room. I diagnosed the fracture, a hairline fissure in the cervical vertebrae. I knew the precise angle, the point of stress, yet I felt nothing, no pain, just the hollow certainty of a surgeon detached from his own body. Interesting, I murmured, the sound swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. A spontaneous fracture, highly unusual. The cat remained motionless, its gaze unwavering. It felt like an accusation, as if it knew something I didn't, or perhaps it knew everything I was trying to forget. The weight on my chest grew heavier, a leaden presence pressing down on my sternum. It was an anesthetic in the silence, a numbing balm to the encroaching madness. I reached for my umbrella, the tattered fabric cool and strangely comforting against my skin. It kept the rain at bay, a small, fragile shield against the deluge of despair. It offered no protection from the emptiness, though, from the chilling realization that I was adrift in a sea of forgotten memories. He stepped through the door, not walked, not entered, stepped a decibite, as if he were a projection, a phantom limb detached from a larger, unseen whole. He had no face, just a smooth, featureless plane where a face should have been, a void where recognition should have bloomed. The cat's eyes didn't widen, didn't narrow. They simply remained two dark stars fixed in the gloom. The rain seemed to intensify, the glassy droplets striking the windows with renewed ferocity. The umbrella's fabric split with a sound like sun-bleached bone snapping dry, brittle and final. It wasn't a sound so much as a sensation, a fracture in the air that I felt in my teeth, my sinuses, my marrow. The rain fell harder, a relentless cascade that soaked me to the bone. But the deck beneath my feet remained dry, as if the world had drawn a line between the soaked and the unsoaked, a line that only I could see. The blood from the split fabric dripped onto the deck, pooling in a dark, viscous pool. It was not red. It was something older, something that had been buried for too long. I knelt, tracing the blood with my fingertips. It was a map, a path carved in liquid, leading me back to the moment I had failed, the moment I had tried to forget. The cat's fur was wet, but not from the rain. It was something else, something slick, something that clung to the air like a whisper. It moved slightly, its emaciated form shifting on the table, the weight of the rain pressing down on it. But it did not fall. It did not move. It simply watched. Its fur, slick and glistening, felt like a second skin, like something that had been peeled from the inside out. I reached out, my fingers brushing against it. It was cool, but not cold. It was something else, something that had been soaked in something I could not name. The suit man stood in the doorway, his form a void, a negation of presence. His absence was a wound, a hole in the air that I could not look away from. He did not blink, he did not breathe. He simply stood, watching the cat's eyes, flat and obsidian, reflected nothing. They were empty, hollow, like the inside of a skull. I felt the weight on my chest again, the crushing pressure that had been with me since the beginning. It was not pain, it was not fear. It was the weight of a memory I had tried to forget. A memory that had been carved into my flesh. I pulled the scalpel from my pocket, its edge cold against my skin. I pressed it to my wrist, the blade slicing through the flesh with a sound like wet parchment tearing. Blood mixed with rain pooling at my feet. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply watched as the blood ran, a dark, viscous river that carved a path across the deck. I wrote the cat's name on the glass, my fingers tracing the letters in the rain. It was not a name. It was a curse. A thing that had been whispered in the dark. The cat licked the blood from the umbrella, its tongue cool and slick against the fabric. Its eyes remained empty, hollow, like the inside of a skull. I felt nothing. I saw nothing. I was nothing. The cat's ribs pressed against my palm like a child's knuckles, frail, brittle, the kind of bones that might shatter under the weight of a sigh. I forced it down, my fingers curling around its spine. The skin stretched taut over vertebrae that felt more like the branches of a dead tree than anything alive. A sound like dry kindling snapping filled my ears, but it wasn't the cat's bones. It was the air itself splitting under the pressure of something unseen. The key lay cold against my thigh, a smooth, blackened oval, its edges worn as if it had been dragged through centuries of dust. I pressed the cat's body against it, the weight of its emaciation pressing into my skin like a brand. A drop of blood welled from the pressure, dark and slow. It fell onto the key with a sound like a single grain of sand hitting a stone. No splash, no ripple, just the quiet certainty of something settling into place. The cat did not struggle. It did not purr. It simply foudoired, a hollow thing filled with the absence of breath. The door shuddered, not the way wood creaks under wind, but the way flesh does when it remembers pain. The marble floor groaned, not with movement, but with the sound of something massive grinding against glass, the kind of friction that should not exist in a place where no one walks. The suit man stepped through, his footsteps making no sound, his body a void carved into the air. He did not look at me. He did not look at the cat. His fingers tapped the doorframe in a rhythm that matched the slow, wet drag of something heavy being pulled across the ceiling. Something that was not the cat, not the suit, not even the ship itself. It was the sound of a memory being dragged back into the light. The cat's eyes were gone, not vanished, not hidden. Absent, as if someone had reached inside my skull and scooped them out with a spoon. The sockets remained, two smooth, black pits, reflecting nothing but the dim glow of the ship's failing lights. I could not look away. The weight on my chest returned, not the crushing pressure of before, but something warmer, something that settled into my bones like a child's head resting against my shoulder. It was not a hand. It was not a ghost. It was the weight of my daughter, her small fingers pressing into my sternum, her breath. No, not breath. The memory of breath filling my lungs until I could taste the salt of her skin, the copper of her blood. The suit man raised a hand. His fingers did not move. The air between us did. Then the cat moved. It did not leap. It did not crawl. It simply twine-folded, its body collapsing inward, like a house of cards, its ribs caving, its spine bending at angles that should have snapped. And then it was on my chest, its weight pressing me into the floor, not with force, but with the quiet insistence of a child who has finally found her way home. I could feel its heartbeat, or what passed for one, against my ribs, a slow, uneven pulse, like the last drip of water from a broken faucet. Its fur was not slick. It was not dry. It was the texture of old parchment, brittle and warm, and when I opened my eyes it was staring at me with the hollow gaze of a thing that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. The door creaked shut behind the suit man. The grinding stopped. The cat's eyes remained empty, and then it smiled. The deck groaned beneath my feet. each plank a separate voice singing an uneasy lullaby as I stepped onto it. The glass coating everything, frozen rain that never melted into water, but remained suspended somewhere between liquid and solid, reflected the failing lights of the ship like tiny shattered moons. My reflection stared back at me from every surface, warped by the curvature of each shard. It was a stranger's face, pale and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to hold more shadows than light. I chased those reflections across the deck, my fingers trailing through their cold, jagged edges. They danced away from me like ghosts fleeing dawn, leaving only empty glass behind. The sound of my pursuit was a symphony of crunching ice and grinding teeth, the ship's bones creaking under the weight of something unseen. The suit man watched me from the doorway leading back inside. His hands were tucked into his pockets, his shoulders relaxed as if he had all the time in the world to stand there doing nothing but existing. He didn't move when I passed him. He simply turned his head just enough so that our eyes met briefly before I looked away. My heart pounded against my ribcage like a trapped animal trying to escape, its rhythm echoing through me with all the subtlety of a hammer striking an anvil. The cat was in my arms still, its body as rigid and unyielding as marble, despite being little more than skin stretched over bone. Its fur felt wrong under my fingers, too slick, too cold, like handling wet parchment that had been left out to stiffen in the sun. I laid it down on a patch of clear glass where no reflection stared back at me. The cat didn't protest, just let its head loll sideways as if watching me through slitted eyes was beyond its interest or capability. Its fur was matted with blood and oil, forming intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe beneath my touch like snakes under stone. The scissors cut through those patterns easily enough, their blades clicking together in a rhythm designed for haircuts rather than this desecration. Each snip released another wave of smell, metallic and sweet, the scent of old blood mixed with something else, something acrid that stung my nostrils like ammonia. Beneath its fur, the cat's body was not skin but bone, the same bone I'd seen before, smooth and yellowed as if carved from ivory. It wasn't just any bone, it was Suvanhudi bone. My daughter's tiny arm, her small hand curled into a fist that would never open again. The cat didn't seem to mind the intrusion. Its eyes remained closed, their lids unmoving even when I prized them apart with my thumbs, revealing nothing but empty sockets staring back at me. No sign of glass or anything else, just two hollow pits where once there had been life. Then came the weight on my chest again, a sudden pressure like someone sitting down hard enough to drive all the air from my lungs. It was heavier this time, more insistent. I could feel it settling into my bones, its edges digging into me with the sharp precision of a scalpel cutting through flesh. The cat stirred at that moment, its body folding in on itself as if collapsing under some unseen force. When it moved again, there were no eyes staring back up at me. Only glass, cold and empty, and reflecting nothing but my own terrified face looking down into those hollow sockets. Then the bone rolled away from us both, tumbling towards the door where the suit man stood watching with his blank face and hands tucked neatly in his pockets. And behind him, beyond that closed doorway, something began to grind slowly against itself. Something heavy being dragged across marble floors, its rhythm measured yet relentless like a heartbeat echoing through empty halls. I stumbled, my foot catching on something sharp and unyielding beneath the carpet of glass. It felt like tripping over a bone, but that was ridiculous. There were no bones here, only the remnants of our shattered world. Yet as I caught myself, one hand pressed into the cold floor for balance, my fingers closed around an object smooth and hard, the very definition of bone. The bone rolled away from me, spinning like a tiny planet on its axis before coming to rest against something solid, a shoe perhaps. The suit man's empty coat hung there in the doorway, swaying slightly as if disturbed by some unseen breeze. But there was no wind here, only the silence that pressed down upon us with all the weight of an ocean wave. I reached for the bone again, my fingers brushing over its surface like a blind woman reading Braille. It seemed to hum under my touch, a low-frequency pulse that vibrated through me, resonating deep within my chest, where it joined forces with another rhythm already beating there. My heart felt like a drum being played by two sets of hands, one steady and insistent, while the other faltered erratically. The bone was warm now, its temperature rising steadily until I could barely hold onto it without burning myself. And still that pulse grew stronger, more insistent, a throbbing in my chest that threatened to consume me whole if I didn't let go soon. But how could I? This thing had been part of her once. It deserved respect, dignity. I cut into the bone with the scissors not because they were sharp, but because their blades fit perfectly within its grooves, as if designed specifically for this purpose alone. Each snip released a wave of heat that seemed to singe my nostrils and burn away all rational thought until there was nothing left but instinct, pure primal need driving me onward. The bone shattered beneath the scissors' kiss, breaking apart into smaller pieces before dissolving entirely into motes of light, so bright they hurt my eyes. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The throbbing in my chest, the pulse beating through the bone, even the sound of wet asphalt absorbing silence seemed to hold its breath. In that moment of utter stillness, I felt something lift from me. A weight gone from my chest like a stone rolled away from a tomb. It was her absence. The cat's presence had been as heavy upon us both, as if it carried all our griefs and fears within itself. Now, freed from its burden, it simply sat there looking at me with those empty sockets that reflected nothing but darkness. The suit man stepped forward then, his coat billowing behind him like a cape. Despite there being no wind on this ship adrift in endless night, he reached out one gloved hand towards the shattered remnants of bone still glowing faintly upon the floor, and as he did so I saw it, an echo of movement within that empty sleeve. His fingers closed around something unseen yet palpable. The air seemed to ripple around them like water disturbed by a stone thrown into its depths. And then, slowly but steadily, his hand began to fill with substance, a bone growing solid and real beneath our eyes until finally he held aloft her tiny arm once more, whole again save for the fact that it was now little more than an empty husk of glass. But even this could not hold my attention. Instead, I found myself drawn towards another sound, the grinding scrape of something heavy being dragged across marble floors elsewhere on board. It echoed through the ship like a heartbeat throbbing in time with mine, a rhythm designed to drive us mad if we listened too closely. And so, despite everything, against all reason and logic, I followed that sound deeper into the belly of this beast, as though summoned by some unspoken command issued from beyond death itself. I sit, or rather, I'm propped up like a marionette discarded mid-performance, in the dining chair that feels colder than it should be beneath my palms. The cat is gone, its absence an empty chasm at my feet, and with it so too has vanished the key to this labyrinthine ship. But there is no time for mourning, not when every surface glows like wet obsidian under a moonless sky. My fingers trace paths on the glass tabletop, not out of idle curiosity, but because they must follow something tangible amidst all this chaos. The lines etched into its face are maps leading me back to where I've been, each ridge and valley echoing memories of pain. There is solace in that, a grim comfort found only at the bottom of wells. Across from me he sits too, the suit man. His coat hangs heavy on his frame like wet laundry left out overnight during this eternal winter we're trapped within. But it isn't cold that keeps him rigid. No, it is something far more sinister. He has no face to speak of, just an expanse of smooth fabric stretching taut over what should be eyes and mouth. I feel the weight again. The sudden press upon my chest like someone settling their full body onto me while I sleep. It is heavy enough that each breath becomes laborious, a battle waged against unseen forces determined to keep oxygen from reaching my lungs. But even as panic threatens to claw its way up my throat, there is another sensation vying for dominance, relief. Because this time, unlike before when the cat sat here, I know what it means. The weight is an anchor tethering me awake amidst dreams that could consume us both, if left unchecked. The umbrella rests beside him on the table. Its fabric remains dry despite everything. No sign of blood rain dares to mar its perfection now. It stands sentinel over our silent communion, a guardian against storms yet unwaged. Or perhaps a trophy from battles past. Either way, it is useless here where glass shards hang suspended midair like pendulums frozen at the crest of their arcs. Then comes sound, the click 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 of piano keys striking empty air. No melody plays. Instead, they echo hollowly against themselves in discordant harmony. It grates on my nerves worse than nails down chalkboards, but somehow manages to be seductive too, an invitation into madness that I can't help but heed. My hands reach out towards the umbrella slowly, each movement deliberate and measured lest some unseen force snatch it away again before I can grasp its handle properly. As my fingers close around familiar leather grips, glass shatters. The tabletop explodes outward in 1,000 tiny fragments, reflecting infinite versions of myself staring back at me from every angle imaginable. And then darkness claims us both. I press my thumb into the glass dust, tracing the grooves left by the shattered tabletop. My knuckles ache from the effort of pushing against the weight still pressing down on my sternum, the anchor holding me awake. The dust isn't just residue, it's the fine grit of the ship's forgotten deck. The same grit that clung to my surgeon's gloves years ago. I write in it, each letter a slow, deliberate scrape against the glassy surface. The cat was the key. My hand trembles violently, the dust piling up under my fingertip like wet sand. The sound is not of paper, but of something worse, the dry, brittle crack of glass underfoot, the sound of 1,000 tiny fractures stitching the air. I write the words slowly, deliberately, each stroke a battle against the tremor shaking my bones. The dust blurs where my tears fall hot, salty, dissolving the fine particles into a slick, muddy paste. The cat was the key. I repeat it, the words smearing as the dust becomes damp, the ink of my own desperation bleeding into the glass. I feel the weight on my chest intensify, a physical pressure, a silent hand pressing down, forcing each breath into a shallow gasp. Relief wars with panic. This is the tether, the only thing keeping me from sinking into the dream void where the cat's absence is a scream. I reach for the umbrella, but it's gone, swallowed by the darkness. Only the dust remains. My fingers drag through the wet dust, smearing the words. Pfff. The dust becomes a thick, clinging sludge, the color of old blood and river silt. I hear it now, not the sound of paper, but the squelcher of damp earth yielding, the sush of something dissolving into itself. The words blur, the dust thickens, and with a final wet crunch, as if glass were being ground into paste under my nail, the letters vanish. The dust turns to a single sodden sheet of paper crumpled in my fist. I open my hand. The paper is gone. Only the wet, gritty residue remains on my palm. The faint scent of rain on stone. The dust is dry again, but the words linger in the air like smoke, wet dust, glass key. I try to speak the words, but my throat is raw, my voice a dry whisper. The dust on my skin feels like cold rain. I close my eyes. The sound is not of paper crumpling. It is the sound of the words dissolving into static, into the foudy-fouchi of glass shards falling back into place. And then wet dust, glass key. The words dissolve into nonsense, a string of syllables that feel like broken teeth. Foudy, the words stop being words. They become the sound of the ship itself groaning in the dark. The dust on my skin feels like glass. The weight on my chest is gone. I am floating. The words are gone. Only the sound remains, the foudy of wet paper dissolving into dust. Wet dust, glass key.